And please review us in your podcast app so other people can find the show and so I can learn how to talk. Please, sir. I can barely talk.
I love that the full circle reading of this is that the Book of Job is a temporary and ephemeral discomfort.
No. This is why that calling it the backpacking trip of Job is actually an exaggeration. Because I guess Job in the end does get healed, right? God's like, sorry.
Yes, and he makes it back twice. Well, it's weird because it's the Bible,
right?
So he gets back twice of everything. But he doesn't get back the 10 children he had.
Yeah.
He gets 20 new children.
Right.
Which you're like,
It's because children don't matter in and of themselves, but only as possessions of adults. Which actually is a nice transition into the novel that we're going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, that's not bad. We always, one thing I will say about us is that we always land the plane.
Well, I think we should talk about the Bluest Eye.
Yeah, I think we already are, but
in a way,
that's it.
In a way, we're certainly talking about the kind of internalized judgments and hierarchies of a small community, which is one of the themes of the book. 1970, Toni Morrison, the great Toni Morrison's debut novel, kind of a novella. It's an awkward length, right? Like if you were picking it up in a paperback, it'd probably be like 130 pages or something like that.
Mine is 207 pages.
Okay, short novel.
And short novel. Yeah, long novella. It is awkward, but there's nothing particularly there's nothing weird about the typeset in this edition. It seems like a normal sized book.
Yeah.
Boy, what a debut.
Yep, and also this is the beginning of our banned book series. This book is often challenged in high school curricula. It was challenged in Broward County, Florida, just last year. It was challenged in Rocky River City Schools, Ohio, just last year. It was challenged in Wentzville, Missouri, and also in Bedford County, Virginia, a county I'm very familiar with, a beautiful place. And lest ye feel judgmental about these places, the only reason we know about these challenges are somebody's fighting back. So the people in these places are not all terrible people. The issue with book bans we can talk about another time. I certainly think there is a role for parents who are concerned about what their children are reading in school, and I think parents have the right to express that. But what we've been seeing lately is more kind of like an astroturfy social movement that has a more nefarious strategy and means and purpose. But I'm happy to have a discussion about whether I think I would have second thoughts about my kid reading The Bluest Eye at various ages. Maybe by 11th or 12th grade, I would be comfortable with that, with some contextualization. I would probably not be comfortable with that in 8th or 9th grade, even though maybe I'm wrong about that. But there's some heavy stuff in the book, and stuff that I'd want to make sure kids not conceptualize, contextualize properly before I expose them to it. But shall we do a recap?
Yeah, so we open the action in the early 1940s in Lorain, Ohio. Our major characters are Claudia, who is kind of our ostensible narrator, although sometimes the narration sort of like drifts away from the first person of Claudia to other narrators that couldn't possibly be Claudia.
Right. And generally when that happens, we're now in third person. The only first person narrator, with maybe, I can't think of any exceptions, is Claudia. With the exception of Soaphead Church's letter to God.
Epistle to God, right. We meet her sister Frida, who is older and helps us experience Claudia's like naivete,
Yep.
which is why she's there. And then Piccola Breedlove, a girl who is a little older than Claudia, who moves in with them. We get to see for several chapters, Claudia, Frida, and Piccola struggle with the normal travails of childhood. So like dealing with shitty peers and cruelty and ostracization, abuse and kindness from their parents, and then going through puberty and sexual maturity. Along the way, all of the characters begin to see and experience how unfair the world can be.
And then, and this is maybe a third of the way through, rather than following Claudia through a kind of coming of age tale, which is kind of how it feels like we're being set up. Like we feel, at least I felt like, okay, Claudia's going to go through something. She's going to have some experience that's going to change her. And that does happen. But what actually starts happening is kind of like narrative concentric circles around Piccola Breedlove.
Yeah.
And we get to know more about her circumstances. There are flashbacks. We see her family life back when she lived with her parents before they had a recent like fight and fire, which is the occasion of her moving in with Claudia and Frida. But prior to that, they were living together and they had a very, I would say, dysfunctional, occasionally loving, often abusive relationship the parents did. Then we kind of even widen our concentric circles and learn about some other people in the community. And then we also, one of the sort of themes, we start learning more and more about Piccola's father, Charlie, and we see him as a child. We see him as a young teenager having a kind of sexual coming of age experience that is interrupted horrifically by a couple of white men with a gun who essentially force him to have a sexual experience with a woman while they watch. And then we also watch him run away from home and try to find his biological father, which he succeeds in doing, but to horrible effect. He can't even really communicate to his father who he is and why he's there, and his father is quite mean, although perhaps in some ways he would have been nicer if he understood who this boy was, but he doesn't. And then that sort of snaps us back to the present, where we have a scene in which Charlie, now a man in his 40s or 50s, has sex with Piccola, who's at that time probably 12 or 13 or something like that.
And in the final chapter, it kind of wraps everything up. We learn what happens to Piccola as a result of the pregnancy and how the other characters in the novel make sense of it all. And
they all live happily ever after.
Yeah. No. They don't.
It ends on a down note. It is not a happy ending. Although Claudia and Frida survive, Claudia does feel something like a stand-in for Toni Morrison, perhaps, in some ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of authorial touches and great character, great device.
Yep.
And Morrison, whether or not Claudia is an author insert or not, they exist. You can do them well, you can do them badly. Morrison, like almost everything in this book, does it really, really well.
Well, and there's another voice you get that's not Claudia's first person. That's often this sort of omniscient narrator who's speaking almost sociologically about the community.
Yeah.
And whether that's sort of the voice of the memoir author, or it does appear to be Toni Morrison's observation in the voice of a kind of omniscient narrator about how Toni Morrison was from Lorain, Ohio at around this time. And so there's a lot of time and ink spent just describing life in this town and people in this town and community in this town. And sometimes we get into a kind of chorus of kind of gossips, and you just hear what the different gossips are saying, to one another about something or another that's rendered in dialogue. You have a question about the plot, and I have a reading to start us off with.
Awesome.
So shall we get into that?
Totally. I mean, so one of the things in our most recent series, one of your kind of criticisms of a couple of the books was that we had like just like so little plot stretched from the Sellout and the Sympathizer. Was one of the reasons that we turned to Ripley for our final kind of chunk of the last series. As I was reading this, I was just sitting there wondering, like, I wonder if this is like enough plot for Jesse. And if so, why? And if not, why?
Well, it is enough plot, except I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be a masterpiece of plotting. It's microplot. I mean, the plot of the novel, I guess, I mean, in my opinion, even though Claudia is the point of view character, I would argue that Piccola's sort of the protagonist because she's the one who undergoes a change and a transformation, and Claudia is more like an observer of this. And so if you say that Piccola,
I think Piccola. I mispronounced it.
Okay, if you
once
say that
already,
Piccola, if you say that Piccola is the protagonist, which is a tough argument to make, but I think I would make it. Then you have Piccola is kicked out of her house. She arrives in the home of Claudia and Frida and finds it somewhat welcoming. However, the wider community considers her ugly, and she gets picked on for that and for her poverty. And then her father has sex with her and gets her pregnant, which in some ways breaks her sanity. I think that's the plot.
Yeah.
And I think it could be the plot of a short story. You could tell the story of Piccola in 20 pages or 30 pages, and it could be pretty good. So what instead the book does is spin out a context in which we understand why and how this has happened to her. And there's a central thesis, I think, to that context. There is no shortage of people behaving very badly, but just when you're ready to judge those people for behaving badly, you're offered an explanation that, while not justifying the bad behavior, explains it, and explains it all in the context, essentially, of white supremacy. And so I think it is enough plot for what the novel is trying to accomplish, which is to explore that. Is it enough plot to be entertaining? You know what? Almost. I do think the novel has a few flaws of attention grabbing, where one has to overcome a certain friction to get going. And actually, like, if you want to respond to this, you can, but if not, I was going to give you a reading of like the first moment where I was like, oh, I'm in.
Yeah,
and
let's do that.
Also a moment, I will say, when I thought the book was going to be something else than what it turned out to be. And so I'll have follow-up questions after this reading. But this is early on in the first big chapter. And this is Claudia's first-person narration. And she's already told us that she gets baby dolls for Christmas, and that they're white baby dolls with blue eyes, and that she doesn't understand why people like them, and she doesn't like them. Then she goes off to talk about how much she doesn't like having to take a bath because she has to wash off all the ink that she's drawn on herself. And then she comes out of that sort of, digression about bathing with this. I destroyed white baby dolls. But the dismembering of dolls was not the true horror. The truly horrifying thing was the transference of the same impulse to little white girls. The indifference with which I could have axed them was shaken only by my desire to do so, to discover what eluded me, the secret of the magic they weaved on others, what made people look at them and say, "Ah," but not for me. The eye slide of black women as they approached them on the street, and the possessive gentleness of their touch as they handled them. If I pinched them, their eyes, unlike the crazed glint of the baby doll's eyes, would fold in pain, and their cry would not be the sound of an icebox door, but a fascinating cry of pain. When I learned how repulsive this disinterested violence was, that it was repulsive because it was disinterested, my shame floundered about for refuge. The best hiding place was love. Thus the conversion from pristine sadism to fabricated hatred, to fraudulent love. It was a small step to Shirley Temple. I learned much later to worship her, just as I learned to delight in cleanliness, knowing, even as I learned, that the change was adjustment without improvement.
I say, God damn.
Yeah.
And yeah, what made your hair stand on end? Like, what made you suddenly sit up and be like, oh, I'm in?
Okay, so I mean, I was always intrigued by the baby doll, but this notion of the bluest eye and the blue eyes felt a little bit familiar to me. Like the idea of like, here's a black girl who is oppressed by kind of white standards of beauty. I was like, I feel like I've heard this before, probably by somebody who was influenced by Toni Morrison.
Correct.
But I think that writing the poetic narration of the transference of violent aggression towards white girls to a sort of non-violent adoration, and how that was change without improvement because both of them are stemming from the same force, was just beautifully put. But I think also at that moment, I was like, I don't think I've ever read a better depiction of the internality of a child's resentments and angers. I don't know that I've ever read that better. It felt so believable and so real, and also poetic and a little bit abstract. The language is beautiful, but it's not easy language to read, you know. And at this point, I still thought this was going to be a story about Claudia, you know, maybe like making a white friend and then doing something mean to her, or, you know, there was going to somehow be a kind of like To Kill a Mockingbird like story where these resentments and then also her then misplaced like love of Shirley Temple, like both of these things were going to somehow be transformed by some experience, which is what you normally do in kind of a coming of age novel, which is how this felt up to this moment. So I was hooked at this point, but it went somewhere I completely wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
But I stayed with it. But let me ask you, like, did you have the same expectation do you remember reading this passage, and were you seeing the same trajectory that I was? Like, this is going to be a story about Claudia growing in some way?
Yeah, this is the next question I have for you.
Okay.
Basically, you know, that what I've got in the rundown, this question about the narrator.
Yeah.
But so I listened to it a few times first, and then I read the text. And you know, I think the first time I listened to it, I might have been listening to it while I was on my bicycle, and it might have been like pretty darn windy.
Yeah.
And like sort of like through my headphones, I was like,
it's not a casual listen.
I think she's breaking a toy.
Yeah.
like just this, and I was like, and then when I went back and listened to it again, I was really struck by the deliberate and premeditated violence of the words.
Yeah.
And this, because the weird thing you get in this moment is there is no way this is Claudia at 11. Like, this is some other removed perspective that is reprising the experience of Claudia at 11. But the vocabulary it's incongruous.
No, it's
incongruous.
not the voice of a child, right? It's the voice of an adult, but in a way articulating, I think, what a child never could.
Right, exactly. And so, like this, so Claudia has now been vested with, you know, the first person point of view, which instantly, you know, we're like, this is our main character. That's the default. And now, like you're sort of like you're saying, and we've been given a starting point.
Yeah.
Like, we have this initial incident of the doll, and it's like, oh, like, whoa, I don't know what's going to come next, but like, I'm kind of worried about Claudia and what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then we move to Piccola.
Yep.
For the art, for pretty much the the remaining arc of the book.
It's like it's like the camera pans across the room, and we're in the same house, and actually it's the next scene because that's when we get the milk, and the mother complaining about the milk, and then I think after that is the ministrating. So this is when Piccola experiences puberty, and the girls try to help her with that, and they briefly get in trouble with the mother until she realizes what's going on, and then she's actually kind of tender. But that's sort of the moment that we sort of shift focus from Claudia to Piccola. It's like this, it's transfer.
It's like Tampopo.
Yeah,
like
it is like Tampopo.
But what the reason why Tampopo works and keeps the beach ball up in the air the whole time is that movement continues. Like that's a crucial fabric of that movie. And I am not suggesting that the Bluest Eye does not work. That's not what I'm saying.
No, but it works differently because in Tampopo you have a central thread, and then you transfer to these little side stories, and then you come back to the central thread. In this case, it's like the first third of the book is Claudia, and then the second 2/3 of the book are Piccola with occasionally Claudia's observations of the moment. And there's this interesting kind of subplot of Claudia and Frida trying to grow flowers to help that I read twice and didn't quite follow.
The final chapter is a weird one.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, I think I have the same question for you that maybe you have for me is does the shift in the narrator or the attention work? What's your take on that?
I think it does, and I think it works because, for the reasons we're saying, Claudia's narration always feels like this is the adult who was Claudia talking to us.
Yeah.
Which is then, this is the adult who was Claudia talking about Claudia's friend Piccola, or Claudia's friend's father. Sometimes there's a kind of chorus-like voice as well, but I think it works for that reason. That's the continuity. Whether is that the author, Toni Morrison, one suspects, but even if this is a fictitious adult who was Claudia, there's still a continuity there, and it works. It works for me. I think it could have worked better with one major change, which is to take the first 2 pages out of the book.
Okay. Now which?
Not the author's note. Stuff? I am talking about, here is the house. It is green and white. It has a red door. It is very pretty. Here is the family. Mother, father, Dick, and Jane live in the green and white. And that goes on for about 2 pages. Then you get, and I don't have it in front of me, but you probably do. I have it. I had an ebook version. Then you get the sentence that's like, Piccola's father got her pregnant, and that's like, that should be the first sentence because it instead it happened after all of that Dick and Jane stuff. It just felt like we were in like James Joyce or something. Like, we're just getting random bits and pieces, and that was a really, really important sentence that I missed the first time around.
I also missed it the first time around, and it was because I was trying to make sense of the see Jane run, all that stuff.
Yep.
And like it is because then
do you have it in front of you?
Yeah. I've got, so it's the second, it's what should be the second sentence of the book, but even then she's buried the lead a little bit, mostly because like I really don't want this book to open with any other sentence than it opens with, because like I mean, like the thing that I'm so jazzed about in this book, and surprise surprise for anyone who's read Toni Morrison forever or knows me, is holy shit, the poetry is just unbelievable.
It's really, really good. Well, can you give us those first 2 sentences, like the ones after Dick and Jane, or maybe like the first, 3, whatever makes sense.
Totally. Quiet as it's kept, there were no marigolds in the fall of 1941. We thought at the time that it was because Piccola was having her father's baby that the marigolds did not grow. A little examination and much less melancholy would have proved to us that our seeds were not the only ones that did not sprout. Nobody's did. Not even the gardens fronting the lake showed marigolds that year. But so deeply concerned were we with the health and safe delivery of Piccola's baby, we could think of nothing but our own magic. If we planted the seeds and said the right words over them, they would blossom, and everything would be all right.
Man, like, I'm sorry to the great Toni Morrison, but if I was her editor in 1969, I would have said, this is how your book starts. We're not doing that author note. We're not doing see Dick and Jane run. That's
where it starts.
That's where it starts, because it's such a good beginning, but I kind of, like, I was already a little bit disoriented by the time we got there.
Yeah, and you're not alone. A lot of the early criticism speaks to, they understand the gesture of the inversion of the very white, four-square, boxy prose of See Jane Run, but almost all of them said that it was basically a needless and unnecessary irony. Given the quality of what comes next.
Yeah, I don't think you need. I think in another book, it's an interesting idea. I mean, it's just like, it feels very first-time author to me, because it is an interesting idea, and it has talent, and it has execution associated. It does provide meaning, but I think that what the first-time author doesn't realize is what you lose by doing it. And also maybe a little bit of like, oh, it's 1970, we have to be weird and experimental. And it's like, you don't. You should, and also, like, the narrative structure of the book is weird and experimental. It's unlike, the closest thing I could think of was As I Lay Dying to it, which is Faulkner. I have not read much James Baldwin, but I imagine the internality of the characters probably feels a lot like James Baldwin's just internality from what I have read of, like, I've read excerpts of his novels, or I've had them read.
Rich, incisive, deep, broad, like intense.
And nothing's off limits, right?
Yeah, totally.
Nothing, there's nothing we're not going to talk about, you know. We're going to talk about our bodies, we're going to talk about our ugly feelings in addition to our beautiful feelings. You know, we're going everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that it works, the narrator shift, and I think it's also really kind of gutsy and amazing.
Yeah.
like you're saying, let's keep that experimental nature. Let's do this like weird authorial sleight of hand where in the first third of the book, you're like, oh, this is Claudia's story.
Yep.
And then like she really does have the guts to be like, nope.
Yeah.
And like doesn't apologize for it, doesn't walk away from it. And like, it's so funny. I mean, debut novels it's great. You get an author's like biggest fears, but you also get their biggest talents kind of writ large.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's really happening here.
And it, it was about halfway through, I was like, wow, there's great writing here, but has this book lost its way? Is this really something kind of like Olive Kittredge now? Which is not to say bad, but like, are what we're really doing is a collection of short stories and a portrait of a community, which, okay, that would be interesting in and of itself. That's fine. Or is this a story? And then it's like, okay, by the time you get to Charlie impregnating his daughter, then the structure of the book snaps into your brain. And maybe even a little before that too, because I mean, there is a moment where that first scene where Charlie Breedlove and his wife he's passed out drunk and they're arguing about who's going to get the coal. And then we get this long description of how they fight. And then there's this allusion to what the scene that comes later, which is that some white men, caught him having sex and then, forced him to keep doing it at gunpoint while they watched. It's interesting. That's there. And I was like, oh, that's an explanation for why he is the way he is. Yeah, that would really mess you up. I could see that. And I almost wonder if Toni Morrison knew that the book was going to contain that scene and was going to contain those flashbacks later or not. Or if she sort of knew these characters and wasn't, day-to-day writing, just sort of wrote about them and then assembled what she had written into something. But I think again, what we're both winding up to is that it works because almost everything you get in the book is in support of a very simple plot.
Yep.
And
totally.
We're basically locating this simple plot in its ecosystem. And everything is in the ecosystem.
Okay. We've talked about this before, but this is a way to sort of make even clearer the point you just made. Who is the most like outlandish country musician in terms of like production and layering and like the richness and tracks and stuff like that, who still adheres to Dukes's maxim, which is that a great country music song has one thing happening all the time?
Well, it's a tough one, because I mean, in terms of whom I don't really know the youngest generation. So, but going back into like 90s country where you had all that overproduction, Alan Jackson, right?
Yeah.
Still, he's got all that modern country stuff, but like this is a song about a Mercury. This is a song about a working man who is going to leave work and start drinking because it's 5 o'clock somewhere. This is a song about the Chattahoochee River.
One particular river.
And how I never knew how much those muddy waters meant to me, but I learned a lot about living and a little about love. I think Alan Jackson is my answer. There are probably other good answers to that, but he has all the trappings of new, post Garth Brooks country while still adhering to, yes, a country song is about one thing.
All the time.
Yeah.
That's what makes Dukes' maxim so interesting.
Yeah.
Is it's about it's the addition of all the time that you put on it.
I think this book is about one thing all the time.
Yeah. I mean, so congratulations, Alan Jackson. You are the Toni Morrison of 1990s country.
1990s country. I can't imagine a better compliment for a country singer.
Hell yeah, I know. We're certainly not calling Toni Morrison the Alan Jackson of literature.
No.
We're not going to do that.
No. I mean, Alan Jackson's great, but like, no, Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison would be like, I cannot even.
I don't think I can. I mean, like, I haven't read much of hers, and I am pissed that I have not read more of hers after reading this book, because like, Jesus fucking Christ, it's amazing.
I read Beloved in 12th grade, 12th grade English, and I think it's better than The Bluest Eye. I haven't read it since, so I don't know.
Well, I've heard Beloved is like the masterwork.
I feel like it has all the talent and ability that we're seeing in The Bluest Eye at a bigger, grander scale and with more precise control of craft.
God damn. That's amazing. What a thing to say coming after this book, which is grand in scale and has an extremely high level of craft already.
It does. I mean, and maybe because I've read Beloved, I do feel like I can see a few seams in this book, and the Dick and Jane bit was one of them. Totally. I think you could maybe argue that sometimes the digressions, sometimes maybe they spiral a bit out of orbit. Sometimes we get kind of like a Pluto as opposed to a Neptune,
The first digression about the whores.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to only pay off a small, like, not a punchline, but a small reveal that the Maginot Line is actually Miss Marie, and she is actually quite a lot kinder than like they're sort of making her out to be.
Yeah.
But the heart of the first section about the whores is how they are different from other whores in their contempt for men.
Yeah.
And the passage about their very sensible contempt for men, I think, is the reason that is there.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably a little too much scaffolding leading up to that reading. But yeah, I mean, we could pick at this book and find some seams, but
yeah.
Why?
Well, and it's also hard to remember them, because the things that probably, I was thinking that maybe Soped Church was excessive, but no, I don't think so, because he's very memorable. And ultimately, it's interesting, because I gave you the plot, but there's another part of the plot I forget to say, which is that I say that Piccola was broken mentally, which I think is true. It's also true that in her mind she magically prays and receives blue eyes, as well as a friend who sees her blue eyes and sees her as beautiful, who she can talk to. Now, I mean, Chris Bagg, do you think that those two elements are real in the reality of this book?
No.
Right. So she's gone mad, right? Like
Yeah.
she's crazy. She's lost her sense of reality. Her mind is broken. But it is Soped Smith who casts the spell in
Right.
her imagination that turns her eyes blue. And there's also something really interesting in that moment because, like, if you were to set out to write the most repugnant character you could think of, you would arrive at something like Soped Smith. And yet he also commits one of the book's like penultimate acts of kindness as well, and generosity too. Like, he's essentially a child molester who sees Piccola in a way that nobody else does and gives her what she needs in that moment.
Yeah,
even
and
though it's a
that's-
fraud and a con.
Right. And that's, I mean, that's what I think one of the just arresting successes of this novel is that it unflinchingly deals with these like just absolutely terrible subjects.
Yeah.
And everybody is a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody is kind of given their moment of not explanation or excuse, but everybody is given their story. And it is, yeah, I mean, like the tragedy is Piccola's, but that's just the tragedy that we're focusing on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's at the center.
Everybody
that's
has
the tragedy.
their own tragedy, and they all intersect. And then Piccola happens to be one of the weakest and least fortunate of the characters, and who has the least help, of anybody.
I've got a reading. So this is my like craft hat moment.
Okay.
And because what I thought so just unreal about this passage, I mean, the ideas are great, the writing is great, the pacing is great, everything about it is pretty amazing. The thing I want you to track as best you can as I'm reading it is the way that the part of speech that outdoors morphs into over the course of these paragraphs.
Okay.
Not just part of speech, but also like, right. When's it a subject? When's it a verb? When's it an object? All of that stuff.
I might grab a notebook.
Yeah.
To take notes.
Yeah. I'm not going to quiz you on it. I just,
No, but I want to track that.
okay. Outdoors, we knew, was the real terror of life. The threat of being outdoors surfaced frequently in those days. Every possibility of excess was curtailed with it. If somebody ate too much, he could end up outdoors. If somebody used too much coal, he could end up outdoors. People could gamble themselves outdoors, drink themselves outdoors. Sometimes mothers put their sons outdoors, and when that happened, regardless of what the son had done, all sympathy was with him. He was outdoors, and his own flesh had done it. To be put outdoors by a landlord was one thing, unfortunate, but an aspect of life over which you had no control, since you could not control your income. But to be slack enough to put oneself outdoors, or heartless enough to put one's own kin outdoors, that was criminal. There is a difference between being put out and being put outdoors. If you are put out, you go somewhere else. If you are outdoors, there is no place to go. The distinction was subtle, but final. Outdoors was the end of something, an irrevocable physical fact, defining and complementing our metaphysical condition. Being a minority in both caste and class, we moved about anyway on the hem of life, struggling to consolidate our weaknesses and hang on, or to creep singly up into the major folds of the garment. Our peripheral existence, however, was something we had learned to deal with, probably because it was abstract. but the concreteness of being outdoors was another matter, like the difference between the concept of death and being, in fact, dead. Dead doesn't change, and outdoors is here to stay.
Yeah. This is still when I thought this was a Claudia coming-of-age story, which it is, by the way, too.
Right, yes, yes.
It is. Claudia does have a coming-of-age arc, a sad one. So one thing I noticed there, right, so if you take the word outdoors, which is a compound word, outdoors is generally a noun most of the time. You can break it down into a preposition and another noun, outdoors, as in through the doors, and that usage of put out is a more explicit version of that. So when somebody is put outdoors, they're put out through the door into the outdoors, but they are also converted adjectively into somebody who is outdoors, which is today, it's similar to how we use the word homeless today. It has become an adjectival state of being. If you've been put out, okay, you were put out, but you are put out and you're sleeping on your mother's couch now, or you're sleeping at your friend's hen house. And that's the distinction. And again, she parallels that with death and dead. Death is a noun, dead is an adjective. Outdoors is both a noun, but it becomes an adjective. And it also comes to mean without home, without family, without anything that matters in this cruel world too. And I mean, you know, it's the mechanics of poetry.
Oh yeah, totally.
In the midst of a novel.
And she's manipulating it. It shows up it shows up early as a subject.
Yeah.
And then it shows up as an object.
Yep.
And then it is, as you said, it's an adjective. Even the verbs that lead to it, in some cases, are transitive and some cases intransitive. And it's just like and then it just sort of like spirals up into poetic philosophy.
Yeah. There's a lot of poetic philosophy in
and
this
it
book.
fucking works.
Yeah.
Like you're still carried along on the like rhythm and the beauty of the prose. And I think.
Well, and I'll say like another thing. It's also anthropology, right? It's like she's doing what a cultural anthropologist would do in this community and saying there's this category that exists for this people. It's a category that might be familiar to you, but these people use this particular terminology for it outdoors. That's different from being put out. There's a kind of like Margaret Mead quality to it as well.
And I think that's why the book is so successful, because like you pointed out that it does this odd shift in focus, and we both are sort of like, it works. And I think one of the reasons why it works is like this voice has so much goddamn authority.
Yeah.
And I think so she's managing to achieve that authority while she is telling the story. It's like feeding kids beets by containing it in chocolate cake. You know, it really does. She does manage to slip in stuff that would normally be unpalatable, like philosophy, into a novel, and turns it into like for me, it was just this like amazing roller coaster high wire act of writing. Well,
I think, you know, it's interesting you use the word authority, because to me, the chocolate cake in your metaphor would be the deliciousness of the prose, which exists. And then but I also think there's a quality to which the writer is like a kind of somewhat strict but loving mom, putting the chocolate cake in front of the kid and being like, eat. Like, it's that authority, which is, you know, disagree with Toni Morrison's view of the world at your own risk.
Yes.
You know? And it's interesting. I was listening to an interview she did on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and there's this moment where Terry questions her about something, and Toni Morrison, I think, takes it as a little bit of a challenge and kind of flips it back on her in a way that is formidable. And you hear Terry Gross kind of catch herself, and then I would say, to her credit, clarify her question in a way that makes more sense to Toni Morrison, and they go on to have kind of a productive discussion. But there is a moment there where it's sort of like, are you questioning like my understanding of this world, and you better not, and because she's from it and she's lived it, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. She has I think there's a quality of authority there that can even be a little bit intimidating. Although having listened to a few interviews with Toni Morrison, somebody could say to her, I don't think the world is quite this way. I think it's this way. And she'll consider it. But that's not what she's doing in this novel. She is not saying, oh, maybe my childhood was more like this. Or maybe these people were. She's like, this is what the world was.
Yeah. And you really believe it.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of this amazing combination of writing chops, earned confidence, and also she started late.
Yeah.
I mean, this comes like she wrote this when she was 39.
Yeah.
And
that's not late. That's a bit early.
That's just right.
Just right. Even a bit early, I would say. I think a first-time novelist should really be in his mid to late 40s or her mid to late 40s.
Exactly.
Or their mid to late 40s.
I mean,
perhaps even early 50s.
Sharon Olds didn't publish until she was in her early 40s.
I mean, if you want to write a novel that is a profession that is tolerant of age.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Say, unlike being a professional baseball player.
True. We got to, that's good. Nice work.
Yeah.
Ding. Drink, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Unless
we brought up baseball.
Unless you develop a knuckle curve or a knuckleball like midway through your career, like who's that guy from the Mets who like developed a knuckleball at age 38 and then had another, like, won the Cy Young Award, had another
I'm
good.
Pretty sure it was Toni Morrison.
Toni Morrison, pitcher for the left-handed pitcher for the Mets. Do you want to do your final reading though?
Sure. Yeah. Why not? Let's leave with her words.
Yep.
Each night, without fail, she prayed for blue eyes. Fervently, for a year, she had prayed. Although somewhat discouraged, she was not without hope. To have something as wonderful as that happen would take a long, long time. Thrown, in this way, into the binding conviction that only a miracle could relieve her, she would never know her beauty. She would see only what there was to see, the eyes of other people. She walks down Garden Avenue to a small grocery store which sells penny candy. 3 pennies are in her shoe, slipping back and forth between the sock and the inner sole. With each step, she feels the painful press of the coins against her foot. A sweet, endurable, even cherished irritation, full of promise and delicate security. There is plenty of time to consider what to buy. Now, however, she moves down an avenue gently buffeted by the familiar and therefore loved images, the dandelions at the base of the telephone pole. Why, she wonders, do people call them weeds? She thought they were pretty. But grown-ups say, Miss Dunyan keeps her yard so nice, not a dandelion anywhere. Hunky women in black babushkas go into the fields with baskets to pull them up. But they do not want the yellow heads, only the jagged leaves. They make dandelion soup, dandelion wine. Nobody loves the head of a dandelion, maybe because there are so many, strong, and soon. There was the sidewalk crack shaped like a Y, and the other one that lifted the concrete up from the dirt floor. Frequently, her sloughing step had made her trip over that one. Skates would go well over the sidewalk, old as it was and smooth. It made the wheels glide evenly with a mild whir. The newly paved walks were bumpy and uncomfortable, and the sound of skate wheels on new walks was grating. These and other inanimate things she saw and experienced. They were real to her. She knew them. They were the codes and touchstones of the world, capable of translation and possession. She owned the crack that made her stumble. She owned the clumps of dandelions whose heads, last fall, she had blown away, whose yellow heads this fall she peered into. And owning them made her part of the world, and the world a part of her.
And she goes and buys the candy.
Yeah, and experiences a racist moment of her world.
Right.
Like that moment of the world, like she was a part of the world and the world was a part of her, moves directly into a scene where she is negated and unseen.
Yeah. It's funny because I can remember, I also listened to this book and I can remember exactly where I was when I read this passage. And it's interesting because I was having a similar experience of being in a place of particular, where there were a number of things that would catch the eye, like cracks in the sidewalk, or in this particular case, the way the trees would heave up cracks in the sidewalk and in the pavement. And also, my neighborhood has just a lot of landscaping, a lot of plants, a lot of both natural and unnatural. And so seeing all the, like the honeysuckle or the ivy poking through the fence. Yeah, I mean, I kind of you gave me an assignment, but I kind of just like lost track of it in my immersion in your reading right now. Other than to say, I think it's the country song always doing one thing. You already said it, that she belongs to the world and the world belongs to her. These are very, very specific details that any writer could observe and put into a book, but they feel very real. They feel very tactile. They're described poetically. They're described vividly. Thought accompanies essential description. So not only do we see what the dandelions look like, we also wonder why they're weeds. We also imagine the yellow and the green. We think about the heads versus the leaves and what people use various parts for. So the specificity of all that. But then it also, it kind of feels like Joyce, just like wandering down the street, observing things, having thoughts. Yeah. There's a stream of consciousness quality, too, that feels very, very realistic. And then, yes, as you say, it's all bound together in a kind of completeness in which she is part of the world and she owns the world and the world owns her.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like so... I'm amazed at how she pulls all of this stuff off in a novel that, I have to work for it. Like I can't, this isn't pulling a Expanse novel off the shelf and, just sinking into the escapism. Like, this is high literature, but it doesn't read like high literature.
There are moments to me that remind me of Steinbeck, like of Mice and Men, specifically, or The Pearl. Which are also, interestingly, sometimes taught in schools and sometimes assigned to children, even though they're about very adult things. Well, that sets up my final question for you, which is this a young adult novel?
Okay, I'm gonna sort of go off of something you said earlier about context. If your parents have been intensely and generously honest with you through your childhood and early adolescence, yes. If this stuff has been hidden from you, if real conversations about sex and race and everything like that have been kept from you, this is a novel that is going to be misinterpreted by that audience. And that's what scares me. For kids that are prepared effectively for this and given the correct context and talked about, you would have to work your way up to it. But I think this is an adult novel that can be taught at the young adult level if you have kids that have been prepared adequately. So that's my long answer of saying, I think no.
There's the worldliness part, and there's also the vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
It's also it's a challenging novel for me, and I am
totally
I would say, I'm pretty good at reading English language novels. But that's not to say I could see teaching this in 12th grade AP English with kids who were avid, enthusiastic readers, well-paced. And I would also, I take your point about adults preparing. I could be sympathetic to a parent who says, I know that my kids need to learn about racism and incest and domestic abuse, but I don't want that to happen at school away from me. I would like some control over that. I think if I were a teacher offering this novel to a high school student, I don't think I would offer it to a middle school student. I would maybe offer it to a high school student. I think I would also offer another alternative novel and let the kids choose and let the parents know about that choice and have some say in it as well. I remember in 12th or 11th grade, we had the choice of either reading The Awakening or Billy Budd by Melville. And for the most part,
interesting.
Yeah, and neither of them have anything particular. Well, Awakening does have some like sexual stuff, right?
This is a curriculum that is simply pressed for time. That was the structure of that choice.
I think it was. Well, they're both similar length. I think probably The Awakening was the teacher's first choice, and Billy Budd was probably the like. If we have any parents out there who are socially conservative, what's another good work of literature that's about the same length? Because it's good. Billy Budd is good.
Oh yeah.
I read The Awakening, and I would like to say that was the proto-feminist in me, and I think that's partially true. But I also think that I was aware that displaying that most of the boys chose to read Billy Budd, and I think I was aware that choosing to read the more feminist novel would be kind of sexy to a certain type of high school girl too. So
there you go.
So young straight men out there. Feminism can be sexy. That's your PSA.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap up our discussion.
Right. Well, let's do some trivia.
I really wanted to dive into the hilarity of like a socially conservative family pointing most of their boys in the direction of Billy Budd, which I'm like, Melville would be happy about that.
Yeah. It's like a little homoerotic, right? But not explicitly. Not explicitly.
Well, I mean, it's Melville. None of it's it's not going to be. It's not explicit, but I mean, it's hot.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into some trivia. I don't remember. I just remember Billy Budd is impressed, and then he's falsely accused of something. That was my recollection. But
I mean,
every sentence of Melville reads like poetry. I think he's one of our most poetic novelists ever. I tricked a real poet one time by rewriting something from White Jacket, which is one of his lesser novels, and I put it in verse. And I put it next to like a Seamus Heaney poem, and I was like, let's talk about these two poems. And nobody picked up that Melville was not, I just reformatted.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was kind of a dirty trick, but I think you go first this time for trivia.
Sure. Okay. All right. So in 1998, Oprah Winfrey discovers Beloved and is desperate to get in contact with Toni Morrison.
Okay.
And cannot, because Toni Morrison's number is not in the phone book. I have a follow-up detail at the end of this question, so I'm not going to make you ask that. But
I will say that like Oprah Winfrey probably has resources beyond the phone book for this sort of thing. But
which of the following resources did she tap to, in fact, get in contact with Toni Morrison?
Okay.
A, the town library. B, the local fire department. Or C, the faculty of Morrison's alma mater, Howard University. Or D, Beowulf Schaefer.
Well, interestingly, my question for you also deals with Howard University. I will say that the Howard University network is quite strong.
I bet.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not a very large school. I mean, I know some people who are, so for example, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, is part of that network, and that would be a legit way to reach out to Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Right. Totally.
If you happen to know somebody who is in their late 40s who also went to Howard, they probably know each other. That said, I really want it to be the town library, so I'm going to go with the town library.
It was the local fire department.
Oh, even better.
I know, even better. And the message that Oprah had the fire department drive out to Toni Morrison's house and deliver was, "Tell Toni Oprah called."
And with a number, I hope.
Yes, with a number. And apparently a shocked Toni Morrison returned the call that very evening. So what is power? Oprah is power, ladies and gentlemen.
There's no doubt that Oprah is power.
Yeah.
What town was this? Was this Lorraine?
Oh, it's not in the goddamn story.
Oh.
I have everything. That was one of my questions. I was like, where was this?
Yeah.
I think the originating newspaper is a Pittsburgh newspaper.
Okay.
And so I think it is somewhere in Western Pennsylvania.
Yep.
But I don't have more details than that.
Interesting. Okay. That's great. I would say, like, it is the dream of every novelist. If I were ever a novelist, I certainly would want to, like, live my 50s and 60s and 70s in a town where nobody could find me, but the fire department knew where I lived, and the local librarian, if would also knew where I lived and could deliver a message. And that's a great novelist life right there. Yep. So my question for you: Toni Morrison went to Howard University in the late 40s, early 50s. And she says that even in college, and actually it wasn't until she went to Howard that she observed colorism, as distinguished from racism. I mean, it's a dimension of racism, but we're not talking about anti-black racism. We're talking about within the black community, the idea that lighter skin is better than darker skin. And she first observed that at Howard. And she said that in her experience, in her life, in 1949 and 50, it was worse in one academic department and better in another in which she took classes.
Oh my goodness.
So A was...
Oh, wait. The
experience of colorism.
Okay, was worse. Not as in it was in flip-flop. It was in reversed directions in different departments.
No,
like,
it wasn't in reversed
like,
directions.
Okay.
And
okay.
I think that colorism, as I understand it, there is always the presumed hierarchy of lighter skin being better, but there's also often a backlash against that, as we saw with the character Marlene in this book, where people are jealous and therefore sometimes can be mean of somebody who's light-skinned too. But generally, the hierarchy is assumed to be.
So so the symptoms of colorism were worse in one department and better in another department.
Right.
Okay.
So
got it.
A, was it that it was worse in the history department and better in the English department? B, was it worse in the English department and better in the drama department? Or C, was it worse in the drama department and better in the history department?
I like this little triplicate planet system that you've drawn
like
with
rock,
the
paper, scissors.
The three of our majors.
Yeah.
God. Okay.
And you might be able to puzzle. I mean, I actually feel like this is one you might be able to puzzle out too. Like, it's not one that you would simply have to have known this anecdote. I think there are clues.
I strongly believe that it will be. I can I could hear the problems of my own reasoning, because I very often reason myself out of the correct answer, but I'm not going to do the thing where then I decide to dive the other way because this forward has always hit the ball in that direction. Yeah, we're not going to do that. I think that no matter what, the correct answer, the worst symptoms are either going to be English or drama. And so I am going to go with the answer where the colorism was worst in the drama department, which I believe was version C.
Worse in the drama department, better in the history department.
Better in the history department, yes.
Was B, worse in the English department and better in the drama department. According to Toni Morrison, in 1949, Howard University is a wonderful place. Today, probably was then too. But yes, according to Toni Morrison, worse in the English department, better in the drama department.
So I do get like half a ding because I did correctly articulate that my majors are the worst majors.
Yeah, you get half a ding, but a full buzz.
Yeah. I can't wait. That sounds like fun.
I mean, I think part of, if you've ever noticed that I have occasionally, I might slag academic English departments on this show from time to time. That might be one clue.
Yeah, that was one. I thought, I just couldn't, I knew that was a possibility, but given the time and the sort of like generally prevailing winds of drama departments, that like it is pretty much better to look like the prevailing attractive thing. That was my reasoning there. But I 100% wanted to take B because when I asked my old boss at Putney, Emily Jones, what the English department at Catlin Gable in Portland was like, she said, without missing a beat, "Oh, they're like a herd of llamas." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, if they're alone, if they are alone and enclosed, they are largely harmless. If they are together and out in the open, they will destroy the countryside.
Yeah. Well, my observation is, even though I love, again, and have had wonderful experiences with English professors alone, and I love the teaching of English, and I even like the workshop, I find that there's a lot of insecurity in English departments, and it kind of circles back to that David Letterman, that quality of like, we must be the ones with the right attitude about this book.
Yep.
And according to Toni Morrison, and I buy this, all that mattered was, could you perform?
Yeah.
And I do think that theater has a kind of objectivity to it, because when a show works and when it doesn't.
Yep,
and if you
totally.
And sure, like, you might prefer someone's performance more than I do, but you can generally tell if the show works, if the audience likes it. And so her claim was that in the English department she sensed colorism, and in the drama department she said all that mattered was, could you perform? And part of the reason I thought you might guess it is because you noted she's a good reader, because she performs her own audiobook too.
That was a good clue.
So I thought that my sense is she's a good reader because reading a book is a kind of dramatic act, and she has some background in that. Chris Bagg, will you read The Bluest Eye again?
Yeah, I will. I am going to read this again. I thought it was amazing.
I'll say that I probably won't, because I feel like I got it. I think I probably will read Song of Solomon, which I have not read.
Yeah, I'm gonna
probably read
going
Beloved
with some Morrison
again.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like, what? I think I ingested this. I think I got it, and I actually think that even though it's amazing, I don't think it's her best work. And so I will certainly read. I've never read Song of Solomon, and it's been over 20 years since I've read Beloved. So I think both of those are due to my list.
When you get around to those hitting your bedside table, let me know, and let's co-read them, and then they will probably come back as episodes of Upper Middlebrow.
What if we had a podcast where we read them and talked about them? We are going to be reading Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, the first half, roughly, I want to say there are something like 48 chapters, so about 25 chapters. Just do the math, count the chapters, divide by 2, you're smart. Another banned book. Oh, wait, I'll wait for you to finish this. Until then, you should know that Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the upstairs ladies of the night. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us and find our listener survey at uppermiddlebrow.com. Please review us in your podcast app, so other people can find the show and so I can learn how to talk. Please, sir. I can barely talk. That was like Miles Davis right there. It's like, play a bad note, keep playing it.
And unfortunately, your mouth is not Miles Davis's trumpet at the moment.
No, I have to rely on my wits. All right, Chris Bagg, let's hear that melodious baritone read the reminder. Here it comes, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Bend, Oregon. Christopher Nightbag.
As a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors and can... See, I can't do it. As a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective and uncreatively named websites, chrisbag.com and jessedukes.com. Thank you so much, Jesse, and back to you.
See you on the podcast next time, everybody. Have a lovely night or day, wherever you may be out there in Pod World.